Hello, hello. This is Dr. Jason Hayes, your host, executive producer of Beyond the Race and Democratic candidate for Lieutenant Governor right here in the great state of Georgia. I want to thank all of you for coming back to my show. We've had a great month of Beyond the Race where we've talked about a multitude of topics. We talked about myself as a candidate while I'm running. We've even talked about critical race theory. We even talked about prison industrial complex and education. So now I want to switch gears. I want to go into healthcare. I want to talk about a controversial topic, a topic that many people say, touch, don't touch. Many people have had broken relationships. Many people have broken friendships. This is about abortion. The title of this podcast is Is abortion care a part of women's health? Now, this is Women's Health Month, so I thought it was appropriate to talk about it. And to answer the question, yes, abortion care is a part of women's health care. I am an internist, board certified. Now, I practice adult health care. That is, I take care of patients' physical exams, whether it's men or women, diabetes, high blood pressure. When we talk about women's health, I do practice women's health. However, when we talk about obstetrics and we also talk about abortion care, that is within the realm of obstetrics and gynecology. Now, my education and training to obstetrics and gynecology is limited to medical school. So we did learn about the definition of pregnancy. We did learn about trimesters, what defines that, what defines a fetus and abortus. And we did have small talks about abortion. So I will talk about abortion care through my eyes as a medical doctor, but also as a someone who's a public servant, but also someone who's a voter and then someone who's a human being. And what I want to tell people is that everyone has an opinion about abortions. Now, whether if you're pro-choice or whether if you're pro-life, you're going to have your own personal opinion. Now, pro-choice, you have your opinion. A pro-lifer may not think that you are right. A pro-lifer will have their opinion, but a pro-choicer may not think that you're 100% right. So pro-life, pro-choice, everyone's different. Everyone has an opinion. But what I do expect is that everyone respects each other and respects their opinion. So this podcast is my discussion, my opinion. So let's talk. Again, is abortion care a part of women's health? And I say yes. So before we go any further, I just want to kind of give a background about myself. Again, I grew up in Louisiana, and in Louisiana, the majority of us are Catholic. And in this state, and again, I'm going to go outside of Republican and Democrat, we believe that life begins at conception. So for many of us in the Catholic religion, we don't believe in birth control. We definitely don't believe in abortion. So if you go to Louisiana, it is very common to see abortions being a no-go. Now, what's interesting about my situation is that I actually have a classmate that actually is an abortionist in Louisiana, and they've actually had a real difficult time as far as making sure they keep their abortion clinics open. There have been laws being passed in which if you didn't have privileges at a hospital, you couldn't do an abortion. So Louisiana is a very difficult state to have an abortion in. Same with Texas and also even Georgia with the heartbeat bill. So I want to talk about the heartbeat bill. I know that was passed about 2 years ago, and it says that at basically 6 weeks, the fetus heart is formed and you can't have an abortion. So when we talk about women's health, we have to understand the basics, menstrual periods. We have to understand, when an egg is released from the ovaries. So essentially, Pregnancy actually starts those 2 weeks after that ovum, that egg is released. And for many women, it's difficult to tell whether if you're pregnant or not. Sometimes women miss their periods. And when they miss their periods, it could be due to stress. So it's a multitude of things that actually causes women to miss their periods. So if a woman misses their period, or if they have a medical condition called PCOS, that's polycystic ovarian syndrome, their cycles may come and go. Or if you're menopausal, your cycles may come and go. Or if you're in the early stages of your menstrual period, for some young ladies, they could have it as early as 9, or they could have it late, maybe 15, 16. Your cycles are variable. So it's difficult for a woman to determine if they're pregnant. So this is what makes this heartbeat bill very difficult to deal with. So for many of us who are pragmatic, who are scientists, who are in the medical community, we're against the heartbeat bill. Now, as an internist, I support my colleagues who are with ACOG, that's the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. I support them. I support what they're saying about abortion care is women's health care. So I support them on this heartbeat bill. So this heartbeat bill needs to be removed here in Georgia. What I'm in favor for with the heartbeat bill is that we actually need to have the right people in the room making the decisions. We need to have OBGYNs in the room. We need to have pediatricians in the room. We need to have people who study embryology, those who have a PhD in that. We need to have them in the room as well. And some people are asking, why do we need to have these people in the room? Because they understand embryology. We're talking about what's a fetus, what's an embryo, fetus, and also organogenesis, which happens anywhere between 3 and 8 weeks of the embryo being formed. That's when your major organs are being formed. So we need to have the right people in the room. We also need to have abortionists, people who actually do abortions. We need to have social workers in the room. We also need to have women who've actually experienced abortions and women who don't experience abortions. So we need the right people in the room to actually sit down and have a discussion about abortions. We need to lean heavily upon the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology as far as what their definition of a fetus and an abortus. Now, in medical school, I learned that at 22 weeks is typically the cutoff of whenever you should have an abortion or not. So, again, we need to rely upon the science. Now, some people right now are listening to me and say, hey, Dr. Hayes is really, really, really pushing towards pro-choice. So for those of you who are pro-life, I'm not against you. As a matter of fact, if someone was to ask me if I was in a situation with, my spouse or girlfriend, significant other, would I be for an abortion? And to be honest with you, actually, I would be against it. And this is just my own personal opinion. Now, if it was a situation in terms of rape, incest, or a situation where we had to choose between the mother and the fetus, then that's a different conversation. So many people, I want them to understand is that there are indications for abortions and there are indications to when we should regulate abortions. Now, pro-choicers may get upset with me about this, but we have to make sure that there are no late-term abortions. And we say late terms, that's like third trimester, even in the second trimester. Now, when I did my research, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology are against late-term abortions. And when we say that, we mean when the fetus is viable. So, the fetus can be viable in the second trimester. And what I learned in medical school is that when this happens, sometimes women do actually have live births during the second trimester. And when this happens, we typically, the child is given steroids to kind of help with the surfactant production. And for those who aren't aware, surfactant is this this material that's in the lungs that keeps the alveoli open. That's the little small tiny sacs where there's air exchange, keeps it open to make sure that the tension from breathing doesn't collapse these alveoli. So the surfactant is needed. So steroids are given, the child is being born. So again, we need the right people in the room to sit down and make decisions about abortion, whether if it's acceptable or not. Because let's look at this. If you're for abortions, then again, the question comes down to when to have the abortions. And if you're against the abortion, the question comes down is why. And what if your daughter was raped and was in a situation where there was incest, and maybe the young lady might be incapable of making a decision. Maybe there are situations that happens. Would you be for abortion? Or whether if you had to choose between your wife or your daughter and the child that was in a car accident. So those questions you have to ask yourself. But at the core of it, if a woman goes into the room with their doctor, whether it's a family practice doctor, internist, obstetrics, gynecologist, and says, hey, I want to discuss termination of pregnancy. And obviously, internists, family practice should refer to OBGYN. Obviously, the OBGYN will have those discussions with the patient. And obviously, if the patient wants to have an abortion, they will refer to the abortionist or the organization that does such. So at the end of the day, I fully support ACOG, that's American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, in their belief that abortion care is women's health care. So Roe versus Wade, that question has come up a lot with me. People have asked, Dr. Hayes, what do you think about it? Should it be overturned? So my belief is this, is that it should not be overturned. Roe versus Wade should be there. And for those who don't know the history about it, back in 1973, and I actually want to look at my notes because we want to make sure, again, we get the language right. So I'm going to look at the legal case of Roe versus Wade. And this is January 22nd, 1973. It was ruled 7-2 that restrictive state regulation of abortion is unconstitutional. And the person, Roe, who actually, Jane Roe, was in Texas, and she basically said that she should have the right to terminate her pregnancy. Now, at the time in Texas, she couldn't do that. The child that she had was put up for adoption, but she challenged. She challenged this, and it eventually made it to the Supreme Court. And the question came down to privacy. Is it the right for the woman to deal with abortion care in a privacy matter? And it pretty much was upheld. Now, there have been other cases where Roe versus Wade, and then there's also another case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, where there are some challenges of actually having it, that is Roe versus Wade, overturned. So I think Roe versus Wade should be protected. But again, we need to define when is it appropriate to have the abortion and when is it not appropriate. So that's my stance on it. Also, we need to look at, actually in Roe versus Wade, they actually did talk about trimesters. First trimester, second trimester, third trimesters, when to actually have the abortion or not. So we do need to define what is a trimester. So I'm going to actually pull this up to it because, again, we want to get the language right. So American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and that's ACOG, ACOG.org. I would highly recommend many of you to go to this website, and the best gynecologists, the best obstetricians They get their fellowship and mastership in it. So highly strong academic, ethical doctors, surgeons as well. They're surgeons. I want you to be aware of that. So let's look at how they define it because this is their field. And I'm an internist, so this is not my field. I'm with the American College of Physicians. I'm also board certified as well. So I do defer to my colleagues with the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology. So one of the questions it says here is, how is the length of my pregnancy measured? And they said pregnancy can be divided into weeks and sometimes days. So the first trimester is the first day of the last menstrual period. That's the first day that you start your flow to 13 weeks and 6 days. And that's the time when fertilization and major organ development occurs. That's organogenesis between third week and 8 week. So major organs are being formed. Second trimester is 14 weeks to 27 weeks and 6 days, the time of rapid growth and development. Now, abortus, 22 weeks. That's what I learned in medical school. So again, I am open to my colleagues, my OBGYN colleagues, to correct me on this, but 22 weeks is typically the cutoff as far as when to have an abortion or not. So again, the question comes down to, should that be lowered? Should we keep it there? And then third trimester, 28 weeks to 40 weeks and 6 days. That's the time when the fetus weight increases and the organs are mature, so they will be ready to function after birth. American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology are against abortions in which the fetus is viable. So 22 weeks is typically the cutoff, and that typically correlates to when surfactant is produced in the lungs, and then when the lungs are able to essentially have the transfer of oxygen with blood. So now I want to use some logic. Those who are pro-life, you said it's a murder. Again, if this was your daughter, your child, your granddaughter, if they were raped, went through incest, or you had to choose between their life and the life of the fetus, what would you do? Same thing when we talk about rape. There was some very ignorant Republicans, like some Republican about 2 years ago in Ohio said, well, God sanctioned rape. I'm going to make this very clear. No, God sanctions rape. We have to start protecting women and stop making these idiotic comments. Women have been marginalized by men and systems as well. So when we talk about critical race theory and we talk about a system as racist, well, we can also say that the system is sexist as well. And you can talk about that without you being a sexist as well too. So many of us men, we have to start looking at things through the eyes of women and try to help understand what they go through. Women go through a lot. They go through menstrual cycles they have to deal with that we don't have to deal with. They have to go through being harassed, by men on a daily basis. Sometimes they're harassed by women as well. They go through a lot of discrimination. So again, we have to be more sensitive about the situation when we're dealing with abortion. But I'm also challenged. Now, this is controversial, but I will say this: men actually do have a role when we talk about abortion rights. Case in point, if I'm married and my wife and I have a child, and if my wife goes to the gynecologist and has a discussion about abortion and has said abortion, but doesn't discuss that with me as a man, as a father who actually, my sperm was used with the egg to form the embryo, the fetus, the child, that's wrong. So, at the end of the day, again, the woman does have the ultimate decision. But when we're talking about a union, being married, then the man does have rights to discuss and speak about whether to have the abortion or not. So that is challenging you as well. Also, when we talk about sitting down and having these conversations about abortion in the political sphere, in the public sector, you're going to have men who have actually done abortions. You're going to have men who are OBGYNs, so they should be involved. But to make things fair, I think if you want to have women as the only ones making the political decisions, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But I just want to challenge you. Again, we should not be nearsighted and short-sighted and say that men shouldn't be involved in the discussions about abortion care, because men should be. But again, that's a discussion for another day. Backtracking again, I want to do some more logic. We talk about government, and many people talk about saying, well, we don't need the government involved in certain decision making. So there are a lot of Republicans, very conservatives, who say we don't want big government. But yet, when you talk about abortion care, you want government involved. Same thing with pro-choicers. You don't want government involved with the abortion care, but you want government involved with other issues. So it's sort of, what's the dynamic here? So there, two schools of thought. Should we have big government? When to have it? When not to have it? So I think people need to start evaluating this and sort of look at things from both angles. Same thing with those who are pro-lifers. You say that abortion is murder. But when the children are born, are you for programs to help the children who maybe are born and the mother and father can't take care of them? So you have to look at that dynamic. If the children are being born, are you for social programs that'll help support them? That means your tax dollars. Same thing, those who are pro-lifers, who may be Republican conservatives, and I'm not trying to put you in a box, but we've seen a lot of Republican conservatives say they're pro-life and abortion is murder, but then you're for capital punishment. That's murder. Same thing with pro-choice. Let's talk about pro-choice. You're for abortion, but then some of you are not for capital punishment, and you call that murder. So I'm just asking people to look at the dichotomy here. Just look at the logic. We just want to think about it. We're all free thinkers. My whole thing about all of this is that pro-lifers, you're not going to get everything that you want. Pro-choicers, you're not going to get everything you want. I just want you to understand that when we come to a decision about all of this, you are not going to get 100% of what you want. At the end of the day, pro-lifers, you need to respect pro-choicers, and pro-choicers, you need to respect pro-lifers. For me, again, I'm for the science. I'm also for making the decision that's in the best interest of the patient. I am for making sure that the doctor-patient relationship is protected. I am for making sure that women do have access to abortions, because guess what? If you strike down Roe versus Wade, if you strike down abortions, guess what's going to happen? It's not going to stop abortions. People are still going to find a way to have an abortion. So the issue that I have, and many people who are pro-choicers, is that people that have abortions will do them, quote unquote, illegally, but they may not be safe. So then not only you're going to have issues with women having these abortions, but unsafe abortions that will harm them, that could kill them, that could damage their womb. And we say womb, we mean uterus, that may stop them from having children again in the future. So we need people to look at everything. Again, I'm an internist. I look at everything. We look at all the variables involved, and we cannot put each patient situation in a box. Everybody's situation is different. Now, just because you're a pro-choicer doesn't necessarily mean that you would do an abortion. And I've heard this from women who said that they believe in the woman's right to choose, but they wouldn't have an abortion. So again, there's going to be different dichotomies, different variables involved. But again, I want to stress pro-life, you're not going to get everything that you want. Pro-choice, you're not going to get everything you want. And we must make sure that we respect each other. No violence, and make sure to respect each other, respect our decisions. Now, one thing I do want to discuss, this is another controversial topic, Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood essentially was started by Margaret Sanger, and they were really much pro women's health care, pro family planning, and we're talking about birth control, condoms. Hey, I'm for that. I'm for birth control. I'm for condoms. I'm for making sure that people protect themselves, especially with condoms, because you're dealing with HIV, hepatitis. We're dealing with a multitude of sexually transmitted diseases. But the one concern that I have about Margaret Sanger that I would love for Planned Parenthood to clear up is that there's documentation that Margaret Sanger said that the Negro should be exterminated like weeds. Now, many of us in the Black community who are aware about this, we're not for Planned Parenthood or Margaret Sanger. And then there's some of us in the Black community who are for Planned Parenthood because there's women's health care. They actually have affordable women's health care. Well, a woman can go in and have a pap smear, breast exam. They can get assistance with the mammograms. They can get STD testing. They can actually get care. So, but again, my concern is the organization, the originator of Planned Parenthood. She's actually, from what I've read, has been a part of eugenics. And those who aren't aware what eugenics is, it's this theory that undesirables will be removed from the population. I have a problem with that. This is a sensitive topic for me. My uncle had Down syndrome. And there was a time when if your child had mental health issues or if your child had developmental issues, that eugenics was the answer. There's also a time when Black women were actually given hysterectomies. They had their tubes tied, and we say tubes tied, tubal ligation. Latino women given hysterectomies, having their tubes tied. So there's some of us in marginalized communities, Black communities, Latino communities, who are afraid of the healthcare system. So when we talk abortion, wow, we're afraid of organizations that are put in our communities that are pushing abortion. So I'm 100% for federally qualified health centers, in communities of need, so we can make sure that those of us who don't have access to health care can get access through the Public Health Service Grant Section 330. You get access to your family practice doctor, your internist, your OBGYN, your pediatrician. You develop relationships. So when young women and young men are sexually active, access to condoms, access to birth control, access to that 340B pharmacy. Become pregnant, family planning. If you decide not to keep the baby, you can be referred to the social worker for adoption. And if you say you want to terminate the pregnancy, that OBGYN is right there who can help you with those options. I'm for federally qualified health centers. I'm for making sure that we have affordable health care for everyone, especially in our counties south of Georgia, who don't have any OBGYNs, any pediatricians, internists. We want to use federally qualified health centers, public health service grant section 330, so we can get these health centers there, get these doctors there, so we can make sure that we reverse these trends of infant mortality and morbidity, reverse these trends on maternal mortality and morbidity. Mortality is death, morbidity, chronic disease from such. So to recap, abortion care is a part of women's health. We must protect Roe versus Wade. 3, we must eliminate the heartbeat bill here in Georgia and Texas, and we need to come back to the table with the right people, OBGYNs who don't practice abortions, OBGYNs who do practice abortions, pediatricians, those who have PhDs in embryologies, social workers, clinical social workers, those who've had abortions, those who haven't had abortions, and then there should be men there too, as well, men and women. We also must make sure that abortions are not being pushed as the only option. Adoption care should be there. We must make sure we reform foster care system, make sure that children are protected in the foster care system because there's abuse there. We must protect our children. We must protect them in the adoption situation. We must. And we also must respect each other. If you're pro-life, must be respected. If you're pro-choice, must be respected. We must respect each other and respect our differences. I'm going to tell you this right now. I actually lost a friendship with someone because we both agreed that there should be abortion care, but because it wasn't exactly the same thing, I lost that friend. And it's sad because people are going to have differences of opinion in this world. We must respect each other because if everyone thought the same, this world would be boring. So again, pro-choice, respect each other. Pro-life, respect each other. You're not going to get 100% of what you want. Abortion care is women's health care. Must have access to it because eliminating abortions will not eliminate abortions. It must be safe. Incest, rape, or if the mother's life is in danger, support abortions. Also, you should support a woman's right to choose at the end of the day, regardless of your religious affiliation. You may not personally want to have an abortion, but who gives you the right to tell a woman not to have one? And also, again, men should be involved in the decision making as well. So again, just want to challenge everyone, including myself, about abortions. Also, we need to challenge how we're looking at it. We do need to look at Planned Parenthood, ask them to answer for Margaret Sanger and the comments that she made. We must look at the healthcare disparities and the racism in reproductive care, especially disproportionately how it's affected Black and Latino women, but also their options for women, abortion care, adoption. We must make sure there's preventive care. Men and women practice safe sex, wear condoms. Make sure you have a relationship with your doctor. Make sure you have access to your doctor. We're still pushing to make sure that you have affordable health insurance. We're still pushing to make sure that we get these federally qualified health centers so you can have the OBGYNs and the pediatricians and internists and family practice doctors so you can have relationships with them. So if you ever get in a situation where if you need to have a discussion about an abortion, they're there, you get the options. So I'm actually going to go ahead and close. Again, abortion care is a part of women's health care, regardless of your personal feelings or not. So I'm going to sign off. Again, this is Dr. Jason Hayes, a board certified internist. I'm also the host and executive producer of Beyond the Race, my podcast, and I am now a qualified Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor right here in the great state of Georgia. If you want to support, go to www.jasonhayes, Hayes, forga.com to learn more about me, the campaign, and you can also donate. And also, you can go to Instagram, Facebook at Jason for Georgia, TikTok at Jason for Georgia, and also at Jason for GA for Twitter, and also LinkedIn at Jason for Georgia as well. Thank you for coming on this podcast. I appreciate all of you who support me. And thank you again so much for giving me a platform. Win, lose, or draw, I am appreciating everything. Thank you again for your support, and hope all of you have a blessed day and a great day. Thank you so much.